With an election looming and a challenge coming from those who want to negotiate a peace with the South, Lincoln knows he needs to land a decisive blow.
At some point, somebody gets tired. Somebody blinks. Somebody makes a mistake. And when you're talking about war, that mistake, that's everything.
Lincoln puts the North's entire industrial might behind one final push. The man who will lead the charge from Chattanooga to Atlanta, William Sherman. His orders to stop for nothing.
I would make this war as severe as possible and show no symptoms of tiring till the South begs for mercy.
Advancing under the cover of night, Sherman's march is sustained by one of the greatest logistical operations yet seen in this conflict. Sherman knows he needs to throw everything he's got at the Confederate Army. While he uses his own supply lines to maximum effect, he destroys those of the South, ripping up their railroad and bending it beyond use. In one day, the North's supply lines replaced 200,000 bullets. While the South is left scavenging on the battlefield for spent rounds, food, even old boots. Sherman calls it total war, a scorched earth approach that becomes the trademark of modern warfare. Finally, with Atlanta under siege, Confederate forces set fire to their own munition stores before abandoning their city to the Union soldiers. Sherman's tactics of total war have won out. His victory helped secure Lincoln's election in the fall. With Atlanta in ruins, he just keeps going, now launching what will be his final assault, the March to the Sea. In the 19th century equivalent of shock and awe, 62,000 Union soldiers wreak a 60-mile wide path of destruction across Georgia. From Atlanta to the coast at Savannah. Supply lines are cut, villages are sacked, and crops torched. Anything of military value is destroyed.
On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avoid it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, the insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it with war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide the effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayer of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern there any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in the living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another, drawn with a sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said that the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphans, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
It was just a red brick house at a little crossroads in Southern Virginia, until the winds of war turned it into one of the most important places in American history, Appomattox, a place author Jonathan Horn says no one should ever take for granted.
It's so easy to look at Appomattox and forget that nothing was inevitable at that moment.
In these fields just outside town, General Ulysses S. Grant and 65,000 Union troops cornered General Robert E. Lee and his remaining force of 30,000 starving Confederate soldiers. The Gray Fox, says Ranger Patrick Schroeder, had finally been run to ground.
He said he would rather die 1,000 deaths than go have to meet with General Grant.
What did he think was going to happen to him?
He expected to be General Grant's prisoner.
At 1:30 in the afternoon, Lee and Grant met.
What's at stake when these two men sit down here?
What's at stake is the future of this country. Will we be one country again?
After 4 years of war and 700,000 dead, the man known as Unconditional Surrender Grant wrote out the terms he thought President Lincoln, with his promise of malice toward none and charity toward all, would want.
Grant offers very generous terms. He's not going to punish the South. He's going to parole these soldiers and allow them to go home.
It was over in 90 minutes. Lee called for his horse.
General Grant takes off his hat to General Lee as he's riding by, and the rest of his staff follows in that salute, as you will, and General Lee doffs his hat to General Grant as he rides away.
And then what does he tell the troops?
He can barely speak, but it's something along the lines of, go home and become good citizens.
The Union troops begin to fire their rifles in the air, and eventually artillery begin to fire salutes, and Grant orders it stopped. He says, stop the firing, the rebels are countrymen again.
Headlines trumpeted the news: the end, Union victory, peace. But one in particular captured what really happened in those 90 minutes. Our nation redeemed. David Martin, CBS News, Appomattox, Virginia.